Happy Halloween. My name is Beezy Smith, and I have a story to share with you that I think you will enjoy on this spooky night. But before I start the story, I wanted to show you that bright light in the sky. That is the full moon. This October 2020, we have 2 full moons, which means that this one, the second one, is called the blue moon. I think that's just a perfect event to take place during this strange and spooky year of 2020. The story I'm going to share with you comes from Ireland, and it's called Mary Culhane and the Dead Man. In Ireland, there's a little village, and every single house in the village has a tradition. Somebody in the family puts a bowl of holy water on the front stoop every single night before the family goes to bed. Now, nobody knows why they do it, but nobody forgets to do it, but still they cannot remember why they do it. But I think this story will give us a very big clue. Now, the Culhane family was a poor family who lived on the edge of this same village long, long ago. They were so poor, in fact, that they had to live on the outskirts of town on the other side of the graveyard. There were Mother Culhane and Father Culhane, and then there were 6 children. Now, the father, he struggled quite a bit. He had trouble in his legs, and it was hard for him to walk. So he always had a blackthorn shillelagh, a walking stick, that he would take with him everywhere he went to make the walk just a little bit easier. Now, one day, he decided to take a shortcut home through the graveyard. It was late in the afternoon, and he wanted to get home as quickly as he could. So with that stick, he hobbled his way through the graveyard, and about halfway through the graveyard, he decided to rest for just a bit on the pile of dirt that was by a freshly dug grave. Now, he sat there for a bit, and then after a while he thought better of the idea, and so he picked himself up and quickly he hurried on home. When he got home, he saw his own wife setting that bowl of holy water onto the front stoop. But she looked at him and she said, "Mr. Culhane, where is your walking stick?" "Oh, my goodness," said he. I must have left it in the graveyard. I sat to rest for just a moment, and I surely left it there sitting on a fresh grave that was dug. Maybe one of our children would go and fetch it for me." "Huh, you think they will, do you? Well, let's wait to ask them until after supper, when their bellies are full." And so it was that soon the family sat down at the table to have supper together. And when their bellies were full, the father looked at his children and he said, "Oh, dear children, won't you do your father a favor? I'm such a befuddling fool. I left my favorite walking stick on a grave in the graveyard. Would one of you please go and fetch it for me?" Well, 5 of those children put their heads down and didn't want to look up at all at their father. But the oldest girl, her name was Mary Culhane. She stood up tall and she said, "Father, I know you need your walking stick, so I will surely go and fetch it for you." Now, her mother and father wished that one of the brothers, the olders, had jumped up and said, "No, no, Mary, let me go in your stead." But that did not happen. But Mary didn't mind. She got up, she walked to the door, she took a kerchief off the hook and tied it around her head, and then out she went. Now her parents called out and said, "You come home as quickly as you can." "Oh, don't worry," said Mary. "I'll be home before the rooster crows up the dawn. 3 calls, you know. You better be home before that," they said. And so Mary went as quickly as she could, for she didn't want to be in the graveyard a moment longer. And soon she could see, in the gloaming of the night, just as the sky was getting dark, she could see that stick of her father's stretched out on a pile of fresh dirt. And so she bent down to pick it up, when all at once she felt something. She felt a cold and clammy hand grab hold of the nape of her neck, and then she felt another hand grab hold of the other side of her neck, and then she felt a horrible weight crawling up onto her back, and then she heard a voice. "Mary Culhane, take me to the village." and a cold, bony finger reached out and pointed down the path. Oh, Mary wanted to just scrape him off, push him away, the way she wrestled with her brothers, but it was as if she had no will of her own. It was as if all of her own life force was drained from her, and she seemed to be doing exactly what he said to do. She felt her feet move forward one after the other. After the other, she wanted so much to scream and stop. Her feet felt like huge rocks as they went forward. With all her might and main, she tried to stop, but she could not. And still that creature pointed down toward the village. Take me there, for I must eat. Down they went, down that path toward the village. She wished that someone would see them. She wished that someone would see them and scream out and rescue her. But no, instead, everyone in the village was fast asleep. As they came into the village, he pointed and said, "Go there, go to that house." But as she took one step toward it, he recoiled and screamed, "No, no, we can't go there. There's holy water on the front stoop." And so he pointed to another house, and against her will, she went toward that house. And again he called out, "No, no, holy water there, I cannot go in." And so it was to every single house until they got to the end of the road, and there was one family who had forgotten to set that bowl of holy water on the front stoop. And so that creature, that monstrous being, called out and said, "Yes, that is the one. That is where I can go to eat and drink. Take me in there." She did not want to go there. This was the home of her friends. There were 3 boys, and the oldest one was her dearest friend on this whole world, and she did not want to go, but her body went forward, even though her heart and her mind told her to stop. Up she went, straight to the door with the creature there leaning on her back. She turned the knob and went through the door as it creaked open. And then he pointed and said, "Take me there to that table and set me down." And so she took him to the very table where the family had just had supper together and set him there. And then he said, "Go to the kitchen and find me something to eat." Into the kitchen she went, like she could find nothing at all, except on the stove there was a pot, and in it was cold porridge. She took a bowl and she scooped some of it in, and leaving the spoon in the bowl, she took out the porridge to him. And he said, "Bring me another bowl, bring me another, and something to drink." She went back in. She found another bowl and filled it with the porridge as well, but there was nothing to drink, nothing at all except the dirty dishwater. And when she set that down and told him this, he said, "Oh, I must have something to drink. Bring me a sharp knife and one more bowl." She couldn't begin to imagine what he wanted with that, but once again her whole being was at his command, and so she went into the kitchen and she found a sharp knife and another bowl, and then he crawled up on her back once more, and he pointed to the stairs and he said, "Take me up there where the people sleep." So up the stairs she went with this dreadful weight upon her back. She hoped that the steps would creak loudly and wake the father from his sleep, but they did not. And when they came to the first room, she opened it up, and there lay the 3 boys, the youngest, the middle, and the eldest, who was her good friend. And then that dreadful creature said, "Take me to that one there." And he pointed to the youngest. She stepped there, and the creature took the knife, and he cut it into the boy's flesh, and holding the bowl beneath, they watched as one drop of blood splashed into the bowl, and the boy stopped breathing. Another drop of blood splashed into the bowl, and the boy's heart stopped beating. A third drop into the bowl, and the boy was dead. And so they went to the middle, and it was exactly the same. Until then they came to the third, her precious friend, and he cut into his flesh, and sure enough, the first drop went, and her friend quit breathing. The second drop came, and she felt as his heart stopped, and the third drop fell, and her friend was dead. Corpses, all three. And that dreadful, wretched, devilish creature laughed a cackling laugh and said, "Ha ha! Now I have something to drink. Take me back to the table." And so down the stairs they went, again her feet moving against her will. Every single step she wished that she could turn and run, but she could not, for she was in his spell. He took that bowl of blood, the three boys' blood mixed together, and he poured some into each of the bowls of porridge. He pulled one in front of him, and the other bowl he shoved in front of Mary and said, Eat this." She looked at it. How could she do that? How could she eat that? How could she? And suddenly she felt herself almost wishing she could, craving it in a way. She looked up and she saw that the wretched, wretched corpse of a man had his face down in the bowl, and he was devouring it like some strange, feral, wild beast. And so when he was not looking, she took her own kerchief off of her head, and then she set it down in her lap, and as quickly as she could, she dumped the contents of the bowl into her kerchief. And there was the empty bowl upon the table when he looked up. "You did it. You ate it. Oh, I am so glad. For now you belong to me. Clean these bowls, for we must hurry back to the graveyard before the rooster gives his third call to bring up the morn." Now, she took that bowl, that kerchief, and she quickly stuffed it into her pocket when she was sure he wasn't looking. And then into the kitchen she went. She washed those bowls in that dirty water, and then she took that kerchief, and she didn't know why she did it, but for some reason she opened a cupboard, and she stuck it way, way to the back and slammed the cupboard door shut, hoping that the creature would never, never know what she had done. And then when she came back, he crawled up on her back and said, "All right, now you take me now. Swiftly we must go." And so out the door they went. She left behind that house knowing that with the dawn would come incredible sorrow. And as they walked, he led her on a different direction, forcing her to go another way. And as they were walking along, he pointed and he said, "You see the hills here? 3 of them there are. Each of those hills has hidden treasure in it, but no one knows except the dead." And Mary thought to herself, "But I know, and I'm not dead." And then something deep in her began to stir. As she walked on and on and on, she finally asked a question, and she said, is there any way at all to bring those boys back to life?" He laughed. "Well, there was, but we ate it." If those 3 boys were fed some of that porridge with their blood in it, they would suddenly come back to life, and they would never know anything of what had happened to them, and all would be well. But no. That choice is now taken away, for I ate mine, and you ate yours. And right then, the rooster crowed for the first time. "What was that sound?" said the creature. "What was that sound?" And Mary looked at him and said, "Oh, no, nothing, nothing. It's just a little lamb bleating in the night. No worries." "Hurry, hurry." But she didn't hurry. She went as slow as she could. And then, just before they reached his grave, there was another call of the rooster. "Was that the rooster?" "No, no," said Mary. "That was the owl. The owl calling in the middle of the night. I'm sure all is well for you." And then there they were at his grave, and all at once he held her with such a forceful grip. He held on to her, and he said, "Now, Mary Culhane, you come to the grave with me for eternity." And suddenly she felt her body falling down, down, down. "Oh, no, please." And then the rooster called a third time, and the creature let out a blood-curdling scream. His hands lost their grip, and he fell down, 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 back into his own coffin. And Mary, on the edge of that grave, she sat for just a moment. She looked down at his coarse, cold, twisted body, and then she took the lid of that coffin and she slammed it down and she hammered it down. She found huge rocks and she piled them onto the lid of that coffin, and then she began to shove dirt into the grave with her own bare hands. And then finally she looked up and she saw a little glimmer of sunlight on the horizon. She picked up her father's blackthorn shillelagh, and oh, she was so weary. Her bones were tired all the way through and through. She walked as quickly as she possibly could back home. When she got home, her family was still asleep. She took the blackthorn shillelagh and she put it right where her father would find it in the morning. And then Mary went to her room and she fell into her bed in a heap of sorrow, and she cried and cried and cried, wishing, hoping that her dreams would wash away the horror that she had just felt. And soon she was asleep in some strange, strange nightmare slumber. And suddenly she felt someone shaking her and calling her name. "Mary, Mary Culhane, you must wake up. You must wake up right now. You lazy girl, get up. A horrible thing has happened, a dreadful thing." Mary opened her eyes, and there she saw her own sweet mother. She said, "Oh, Mother, Mother." And her mother looked at her and said, "Oh, Mary, a horrible thing has happened. The boys at the edge of the village, the ones, you know, the boy that is your friend, he and his 2 brothers have died in the middle of the night. There is a wake. It's starting right now, and we must go. Get yourself up, you lazy girl." But then her mother looked, and her mother saw that Mary's face was gaunt, with huge dark circles beneath her eyes. Her mother held her face and she said, "Oh, my sweet girl, you look as if you were haunted." And Mary cried and cried, "Oh, Mother, I am so tired. Please, may I sleep just for a while? I promise I will come." And her mother knew that she must say yes, and she did. "Come when you can. Rest now." And in a very short while, the Culhane family was gone, and Mary slept in the brightness of the day. And it wasn't too long, though, that she woke up and knew where she had to be. As quickly as she could, she hurried down to the village, taking that shortcut through the graveyard, even though she wanted not a moment in that horrid wretched, unholy place. And on she went, and then she burst straight through the door of that house. The room was filled with everyone from the village, every single person weeping and trying to comfort the poor bereft parents. And then Mary, though, she walked straight up to the father and she stared at him and she said, "What would you give me if I could bring your boys back to life?" The whole room let out a loud gasp of horror at the girl's words. Her own father stepped to her and shook her arm and said, "Mary, how could you talk to them like that?" But she pushed her father away and she said, "No, father, please, let me. And again she looked at the man and she said, "Tell me, what would you give me?" And the man said, "I would give you the stars and the moon. I would give you anything. But it's hopeless and helpless. It can't be done. They are dead and we don't know why." And Mary looked at him and she said, "I promise you, I can bring them back to life. Would you give me those 3 hills out there? Would you give them to me? It's just land. I want my sons. I would give you anything." And with that promise, she hurried into that kitchen. She tore open that cupboard and she pulled out her kerchief. And with everyone staring at her agog, she hurried up those stairs to where those 3 boys were laid out, their corpses already starting to grow cold. And then she went to the youngest one. She took some of that bloody porridge, his own blood, and she opened up his jaw and she shoved it into his mouth. She practically had to make him chew it. "Please swallow, swallow." And soon the boy gasped and he swallowed. He caught his breath and he opened his eyes. She did the same to the second boy, and the same thing happened. She shoved and shoved that bloody porridge into his mouth, and then his eyes opened. And he looked at her and blinked. And then to the third, her precious friend, she shook him and she shoved it in and she said, "Oh, please, please live." And all at once, she felt his skin growing warm. She felt him take a heaving breath. And his heart was beating again. The mother and father could not believe what they were watching. The father reached out and said, "Oh, my sons, you are alive." He called each boy by name, and each one sat up. "Father, why are all these people here?" they asked, for they had no idea what had happened. And so it was that the father, in that breath, gave those 3 hills and the land around them to Mary Culhane. Now later that day, Mary told them what had happened. She told them how she learned what would save those boys and bring them back to life. And she told them how it was that this had happened, that the holy water had been forgotten. And so, not long thereafter, Mary Culhane dug and dug in the first of those hills, and sure enough, there was a treasure. She took that treasure and she built a fine house for her mother and her brothers and sisters. And then, the next year, she built a fine house for herself, with the hope that she and her friend might be wed. And just a few years later, they were. Mary Culhane was able to not only save her dearest friend, but then embrace him as her husband. And so it is that Mary Culhane and her husband's children, and their children, and their children's children, never forgot to set that bowl of holy water on the front stoop every single night. Mary Culhane and the Dead Man. Happy Halloween.